Before I begin, I'd like to state that a favorite Intravallo does not indicate that the rest were subpar in quality. I just feel like the highlighted Intervallos do serve their purpose better and are more fond of these compared to the rest. Just because an Intervallo is goated does not mean the others are washed. You got that? Yeah? We're typing one? Twinning Threads and Nocturnal Sweeping are my favorite Intervallos of the game so far, as the former ties the loose ends of the canto, views the character's reactions to it, and expands on concepts introduced or heavily featured during the canto. At the same time, some setup for future content does take place, namely the introduction of another faction in the ring, Kira's future, and a formal introduction to the Wayfarer Corp. Most importantly, hints and nods to Merceau's story, as the sinner's looking to Merceau for guidance on how to appropriately react in a funeral, is ironic given that he did not cry during his mother's. While the latter places emphasis on the inverse, prioritizing introduction of new characters, concepts, and conflicts that were pertinent in Canto 8. Having some content covered in the Intervallo is quite useful as to not slow down the main canto with too many introductions. However, at the same time, it does show reoccurring elements from the in-game world in order to keep the players engaged. For example, Ricardo, Sweepers, Shichun, and references to the LCE event. The fact that both have less budget than a canto but still remains engaging by using prior cantos to its strength is a good sign of good filler content, as there is consistent callbacks to pre-existing themes and topics, which feels like a good payoff for longtime players paying attention thus far. What Twinning Threads does right is the fact that it feels very immersive and connected to the main story despite it being an intervallo. Intervallos, literally meaning gap in time or pause in events, will usually put them in an unideal position due to having two major factors inherently present in its existence. Firstly, it's the fact that it's basically filler episodes that are not allowed to progress the story in any way and only exist as a bridge between cantos both in terms of narrative and as a means to retain player engagement. And secondly, not only in terms of narrative does it have to be frugal, but also in its presentation of its contents, considering how, again, it's not a canto and occurs between two major events, the budget of effort allocated has to be somewhat limited. Intervallos don't have melee songs, usually have only one major encounter, and a significantly shorter duration. So, how does one create, for lack of a better term, a filler episode that does not feel like unnecessary padding? You work within the confines of these cantos, of course. And I don't mean just mention it in the story that you're on your way to the next event and have the intervallo set somewhere else disconnected from the main story. The looming tension of heading towards or the release from the recent completion of cantos has to be present to ground the player's immersion into the main plot and still make it feel relevant. What I mean is, have the intervallo itself exist as a branch of the main story, and use it to add more depth to the upcoming or recently concluded cantos. That being said, instead of complaining about what I felt the other intervallos did that I found lacking, I'll just place my focus on the aspects of TT and NS that I liked the most. The thing I like about both these intervallos is that it remembers and calls back to past events while teasing the upcoming canto, and it is a good way to retain engagement from the players during these times. Both are the inverse of each other though. Sweepers has the upcoming canto as the focus of its story, a perfect prelude, so to speak, while Twinning Threads has a higher focus on the canto that just came prior. For example, Sweepers places a bigger emphasis on introducing pertinent characters for the next canto, Jiakyu, Zilu, and Jigong, just to name a few. It also begins the concept of the High Arc tournament. Then, the overall temperament and attitude of the family was also introduced, as shown by the underhanded tactics that the other members of Honglu's family might use to eliminate competition. Before Canto 8 even begins, we would already know of the stakes involved, alongside the scope of the competition being more than just a handful of people, and how little honor they actually have. An emphasis on the importance of power and leverage is also present, and lastly, the untrusting mentality every sibling had for each other despite being family, all of which were core themes of Canto 8. At the same time, it also wasn't too focused on the setup for the canto as it had payoffs and callbacks from prior Limbus stories, Shichun being a temporary ally in La Mancha land and her interest in Don Quixote's powers, which again was an important aspect for the upcoming canto, and obviously Ricardo. There were also details returning, as during the LCE checkup, Hohenheim ranks the sinners by their combat prowess prior to their recruitment to the bus, which is reinforced by the fact that the top 5 sinners survived the initial ambush. Also, Ryoshu saying she only listens to people stronger than her, and Gesu ordered Ryoshu to keep an eye on you before the ambush occurred. Twinning Threads then has the prior kantos and stories as its focus. It remembers how Heathcliff is in a similar situation to Ryoshu, and as such has moments of reflection and even reacts when Ryoshu resorts to losing the memories of the one she loves. Seemingly without concern. It also brings up the fact that Don Quixote also had a dad who displayed more quirks and whimsy than she did, and that she would opt to play along with him as to bond with his eccentricities, as did Kira and Ryoshu with Matthias. Then we also get another small glimpse into Rodion's issues of inadequacy, which is exacerbated by the reveal of the people who possess marks similar to Sinclair's. All these little details coming back feels like a good release for paying attention, so the satisfaction then is not in the fact that the plot progresses, but is in connecting all the threads, get it, together in one Intravallo. It's a good kind of filler where it exists outside the main story progression, but noteworthy interactions and moments still transpire. For Twinning Threads, the final encounter design is well organized, as Rufo has a large amount of damage reduction during her second phase. That is reduced by applying different status types. Assisting you in this fight is Kira, who will apply a reliable amount of bleed and burn, which not only displays the interaction with her passives, if the players are not paying attention or reading, but also is a genuine assistance as she can actually win clashes alongside applying good statuses. The companion in this fight actually feels like a key unit and not just a person that exists and clashes, or just there to mog you by being significantly stronger. Though in the story, Faust doesn't acknowledge her assistance, but I won't deny Kira her flowers and say that having her fight with you did feel nice. As for Nocturnal Sweeping, the two boss encounters are unique in their own right. The presentation of the Jilu and Ricardo fight was captivating, as at first you are fighting a mysterious Mao Heisho, who has debuffs applied on themselves just for it to be a relatively fair fight. Then, although spoiled by the Intervallo event map, Ricardo appears to administer his vengeance. It is a unique mid-fight interaction that highlights the animosity present between all 3 factions involved, where due to Shi Yuhua's inability to speak with an ounce of intelligence, accidentally draws Ricardo's ire, forcing Jilu and the other Heishos to get swept up in Ricardo's Book of Vengeance, and obviously fight him. However, after a moment of fighting, Yuhua flees, allowing Ricardo to direct his attention towards you, in order to sweep up the business he has with the sinners. After a few moments of fighting, however, the clock strikes 3:14, and Dawn senses a presence not too dissimilar from hers. And then, they arrive. Again, your fight is intercepted by another group that seeks to sweep you off your feet by sheer numbers. The interruption temporarily forces Ricardo to sweep his business under the rug, as the horde demands more of his attention. You are then forced to contend with wave over wave of sweepers, while, arguably, one of the best, most intense battle music is ever playing. Studio AIM is usually exceptional at conveying aspects of the fight and story in their music, and this is no different. Having a modern intense beat overlaid with the Sanxian represents Hong Yuan's Chinese inspiration, overlaid with the modern presentation that Limbus Company has. The intermittent whooshing and whirring that occurs obviously represents the chaotic nature of being caught up in a sweeper wave. While the fight itself is just a normal encounter, the presentation is great. Shichun is present, and while not as invaluable as Kira, still helps the fight feel more lively. The stage is overrun by wave over wave of sweepers, such that they are constantly just passing by and occupy most of the space in the screen. In the background, you can also see Ricardo and his brothers struggling just as much as you are to survive. The stage and background changes twice to show the dynamic nature of getting your fake building overrun and destroyed. And then, after you survive the 3 waves, the game acknowledges that by showing the end screen not as a victory, but just confirming your survival. It is a very unique take on what is basically just a normal spam win rate encounter that sweeps the player's attention away by virtue of the sheer amount of details present. As the fight concludes, Ricardo is blasted away by the restructuring that occurs in H-Corp. which again is an important aspect of Canto 8 that is pre-introduced to us in this Intravallo. Overall, every moment in this fight feels important, and just as the sweepers came in overwhelming numbers, so did the attention to detail. Which is why it's a notable encounter despite the enemies just having relatively basic kits. In conclusion, while Intervallos are just meant to be filler events to retain player engagement and interest before the next Canto, they can still have very interesting moments or important purposes despite their limitations. Either by preparing the players for the next Canto by introducing elements, characters, and themes that will be pertinent, or by presenting a return on investment on the attention that the player has been given so far by tying together details and moments mentioned in prior events. Despite not having a melee song, Studio Aim's talent in using music as a medium to increase immersion in the current event shines through to add extra detail on these encounters, and by having fights designed and presented in a unique manner can still fill the void of it not being a Canto. Aspects which the two Intervallos examined displayed remarkably well, which ranks them higher in my personal list. However, I must stress that these are only opinions, and just because I place these two higher than the others does not mean I dislike the other Intervallos or anyone that has a differing opinion. I hope you found this video entertaining, thank you so much for watching, and be sure to drink plenty of water.